Hi, this is your host Sapin Bhartia, and welcome to another episode of TFiR Let's Talk. And today we have with us Mike Stahnke, Vice President of Platform at CircleCI. Mike, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and this is the first time you and I are talking, so I would love to know a bit about the company itself. Talk a bit about, of course, we have covered CircleCI a lot here, but since you are here, so I would love to hear from you. How would you define the company and what do you folks do there?
Yeah, so CircleCI is really all about automating confidence. We want to make sure that developers can move quickly and deliver the changes that they've been working on out to the end users so that they can get the value that they've been working so hard on. We want to make sure that the developer basically is only limited by their own ideas and not by the ecosystem around them. We want to make sure that the tools they use are the best in class, and that they have the option to build and validate against all these other inputs that come at you. When you're developing a lot, you have a bunch of open source libraries, or you have third-party toolkits, or you have third-party API platforms, and all of that becomes the complicated part of your application. And so we really want to give you confidence that you've validated against all of those things, and maybe not just the unit tests of the code that you wrote, but how does that code perform in a larger ecosystem to deliver the larger amount of value for your customers and users.
You're using the term developers a lot here, and we kind of, ever since cloud native came in, we start talking about the term DevOps a lot, which, where your developers are also responsible for operations, shift-left movement is happening there. Things are moving to the developers pipeline there. So when you say developers, first of all, how would you define developers? And do you still see, silos may not be the right word, but there are still teams who are still focused purely on developing, writing, applications which add value to your business, versus teams who are responsible for the whole life cycle of that, product, project, service?
We definitely still see customers doing things all across the board in different ways. I think it's probably a little more common now, maybe even a lot more common now than, say, 5 or 8 years ago, 10 years ago, to have the teams that are writing their own software run it. But I think that it still kind of falls back to having a platform on top of it. The people that are writing software all day, the developers, generally have some operational experience, but maybe they're not deep experienced, specialized experts. And so if you can have common patterns in a platform that, as long as I conform to these constraints, my application will probably run okay, and I'll be able to troubleshoot it with known patterns and playbooks. I think that's really what we're trying to get to is, a better platform that developers can kind of be, yes, they can be responsible and accountable for the code they run and the services they build, but also that they don't have to necessarily, be full stack all the way out, from the UI all the way down to the chipset that's running in the server. There's just a lot of different stuff in there. And so we keep adding these layers of abstraction. We need to make them better and more user-friendly. Layers of abstraction really is what we keep working on from a platform outbound to make developers able to do more of that operations. And there are still cases where you have separate operations team. It can be that it's a deep expertise area, where it's just a specialized skill set, particular for that company or that business, that line of business. Or it can be that some places just like, hey, we want people working on new features that look like this, and we want people working on maintenance and routine upgrades that look like that. And sometimes that's an okay way to run a business. I've seen it done all ways, and I've seen it done right always, and I've seen it done wrong always. And so I don't think that necessarily one pattern indicates that you'll be correct or that you'll have better outcomes necessarily. I think we can track overall where the industry's gone, and I think those outcomes are largely better, but I think it all depends on exactly what you're measuring. So it's there's a lot of ways behind it. I guess, yeah, we certainly see a lot of the DevOps persona type people that are, working with CircleCI or working with, their build pipelines and really trying to be that bridge between, the classic operations person and the modern day developer.
Right. The reason I asked that question was also to better understand, or better, viewers have better understanding of the next question that I'm going to ask, which is more about the challenges that, the software developers face. Because once again, if you're only writing business application and you're not responsible for securing it, maintaining it, lifecycle, then your challenge is totally different than just writing and it'll be done. So from CircleCI's perspective, since you said, you kind of cater to the wide gamut or spectrum of developers, DevOps there. What are the patterns or challenges that you see are common that you feel that, hey, this is the pain point that you think, hey, we have to solve this one?
The patterns that are common are usually kind of developers thinking about their own code, but not thinking about how it runs. And so a lot of times you think about how hard is this to build, but the truth of the matter is building something can sometimes be almost a rounding error next to operating it in perpetuity. And so, the cost of that running it forever is really difficult. And so did the developer take the time to think about instrumentation and, measurements and monitoring and observability and, being able to debug while it's running, all of those things. And so I think it's a tough grab for a lot of those developers to think about the complexity of the situation and just, they can think about it kind of while they're building, but you don't learn about some of that stuff until it's been operating for a while or until you have tens of thousands of users going through it or requests per second at a rate you never really thought about. And once that happens, maybe it's not your code that's the problem. Maybe it's the platform you built it upon. Your payment processor can't handle things that quickly, or your third-party queuing system can't handle things that quickly. And now the developer becomes kind of a jack of all trades technologist to figure out how do we solve this problem. And so, we try and help you validate that and help you be allowed to, build tests and have complicated validation scenarios throughout CircleCI, and that's what a lot of our customers take huge advantage of is the more complicated validation beyond I can run unit tests, which there's a lot of value in unit tests, but there's a whole lot of value elsewhere as well.
I also was thinking a bit about technical debt or tribal knowledge that happens within companies when one team or one developer working and they move out. Either they will take that knowledge with them. So how much, I will come back to the whole, I'm just trying to build the whole problem area, then we'll look at the solution area. So how do you look, how serious is that problem there?
I mean, technical debt is one of those things that's everywhere, right? They're always talking about it. Every developer, it's one of their hot buttons usually. Hey, we're not getting enough time for maintenance or technical debt or whatever. And I usually stop and say, hey, can you define technical debt a little bit more? Because I think it's kind of just been given this push aside term that's it's kind of anything that the product manager doesn't want you to do is technical debt. Well, that's not really quite how that should work. Non-functional requirements, things like can you handle the throughput, can you handle the the security and all of that, that's not technical debt. That's actually things you need to do to build the proper system. And so I really try and push back and ask a lot of questions around technical debt, but there is a lot that occurs over time, of hey, we took a shortcut here so that we could ship in Q1 versus Q2, and so we made a tactical decision to take a shortcut here. That can be real technical debt that maybe needs to get unwound later, and maybe it doesn't. And I think that's one of the things too, is sometimes you can let the thing that you thought wasn't the perfect way to do something can be the long-term way that something works for a long time. Don't optimize it until you have to in some cases.
Yeah, you talked about the technical debt part. I also want to talk about the tribal knowledge part, where the knowledge gets stuck with the developer, because you were talking about,
for tribal knowledge. I mean, gosh, isn't that the problem we've all been trying to solve for as long as I've been in software or in technology at all? I mean, when people move on, it's how do you find what they know? And some of it's just through lack of discovery, or you try and discover it, you have the pain that comes up forward and you have to learn it for yourself. Obviously there's lots of tools out there that help you document things. However, in my experience, most developers don't spend a ton of time on documentation. And so, the easiest way to kind of prevent tribal knowledge is to create a bunch of standards for how applications are built or how they're set up together. And, maybe all the dashboards for debugging look the same, so that if you've worked with one service, you've kind of worked with them all, or you know how to debug them all live. And I think, there's so much power in doing things the same way. Consistency has so much power. And I think that a lot of places, they want to say, well, we're all unique, or we want you to be creative, or, we have 4 teams and they do it 4 different ways. Well, if they all did it the same way, you'd be a little bit more, resistant to tribal knowledge, or a little more resilient against it. And I think that some standards are really good, and obviously, too much structure and too much standards can be very confining for certain types of people. But I'd really like to see, kind of software practices evolve and mature that way inside of companies. And so if you have a lot more standards, I think it really helps more with your tribal knowledge. And then, of course, if you have really good testing, it can also help with your tribal knowledge and say, I want to refactor a subsystem. Well, if the tests are all there already, you can refactor it a lot more easily than if they're not, because first you have to figure out what the intended behavior was to make the tests. And that's a tall order.
Right. Once again, thanks for taking that question. We have looked at some of the problem areas, and that's where let's look at the solution part. Technological solutions are there. Of course, there's a massive ecosystem. CircleCI is one of the players there, but there is also culture problem. So let's look at it now, how CircleCI kind of helps once again teams address this both culturally and also technologically.
I mean, culturally, we try and provide you with a lot of data around what your team is doing and how they're behaving. Things like how many times are you kicking off a build, or how fast are you recovering from being, from a build. And if you kind of look at those classic DevOps metrics, they're pretty analogous to those types of things of what's your recovery time, or what's your, lead time to change or throughput. And so we have a whole software paper that we write and publish annually around the state of software delivery that uses all the CircleCI data, rather than survey data. Let's look at what people are actually doing with the data. And we look at thousands and thousands or millions of data points, and we spit out this report. And then we also have that available to the developers as just a usage. It's a usage pane inside of CircleCI. If you want to click on our Insights tab, you can kind of see, okay, this thing fails this often, or our average recovery time is 12 minutes, or under 10 minutes. Our runtime duration is usually this. And now we even tell you like what our projected runtime is for you when you submit a workload. So from a cultural perspective, it can kind of help you think, okay, I see a build that takes 25 minutes. Is that acceptable for the way that I want to work, or I want this team to work? And for some people, a 25-minute build, they would, be as happy as could be. And for other people, a 25-minute build is red alert status and terrible. And so, some companies, we see them that, they say if a build takes more than 4 minutes, it's an incident, and we need, test engineering to go through and make it faster. And the other places are very, they have maybe way more complexity, and 25 minutes is fine. But the thing is, you can establish your own cultural norms there and say, okay, if we're out of bounds, how do we rework this, and how do we change this? And so I think a lot of culture can be about measurement, but then there's also just, kind of the softer things about psychological safety and how do you empower different teams. And the way that we try and do that is be a really great tool that developers want to work with, so you can attract people that you want to work with. And that's, that's kind of the softer side of the culture, but that's the way we're going after it.
Yeah, so let's look at the softer side of the culture, which is also like products side of the culture. So let's talk about what, I'm not talking about the whole product lineup, but let's just pick some solutions that you are offering to customers, users, developers, so that it will make life easier for them.
Our primary offering, we call it just CircleCI Cloud, or so it's out in the cloud. You can just kind of push your code up to your repository of choice, and we'll validate from there. And so, it's a pipeline as code setup where you have a YAML file, you set up your definitions, you push, and validation happens. And you don't have to run any computers or figure out what the capacity plan is, or are you contingent against this, or do you need to upgrade this plugin on this software, or any of that. We take care of all that for you. It's pretty great. It's pretty hard to do at scale, but we have thousands and thousands of customers, and that's what we get good at. And that's at my last job, I had to run our own CI system internally, and I never want to do it again. So now I run one for everybody, and maybe that was the weird choice, but it's at least better. I can scale it out, build a bigger hammer for the industry. Our other offering is an on-premise delivery. Some people have requirements that they want to have their code never leave their own premises, or they want all their testing to be in-house, or they have to connect to maybe some esoteric hardware that is not readily available in a cloud solution at all times. And that's the case. We're there to meet you. And it might take a little bit more administration, because obviously you don't get the benefit of the 630 plus employees at CircleCI going to help and make that great all the time. But we will help you, and of course we have support packages and all that. But you will have to be, operationally sound a little bit to run your own version of CircleCI. But a lot of customers do it, and they really like it, and it meets their requirements from either a compliance or a, security standpoint for what they're going for.
You folks recently also announced, support for GitLab SaaS customers. So talk a bit about that announcement. Once again, how does it help customers?
Yeah, I mean, it was our number one issue that was kind of upvoted by the community at large. They said, hey, we want to be able to use CircleCI with GitLab, and it took us a while. A lot of our internal architecture had been pretty tied to the way GitHub did some things. We had Bitbucket in there as well, but it was, so we had to update and modernize a lot of our permission model. And now it's, it has more features, and it's more robust for all of our customers, not just those GitLab users. So we had to do a little bit of refactoring for the permission and organizational model, things like that. And now we have GitLab Support added. So that means that if you're one of the hundreds of thousands of GitLab users out there in the cloud, you can now use CircleCI to do your validation. And what we also commonly see is some companies maybe have GitHub and GitLab, either maybe because they bought a company that used a different one, or a different business unit had selected, one or the other for various and sundry reasons. And now you can use one CI system if you have multiple inputs coming in, like maybe some's from GitHub and some's from GitLab. So we just want to be able to meet you where you're at, and make sure that if you want to choose the best CI system on the planet, in my opinion, you can use it with, whatever VCS you have coming at you.
Mike, thank you so much for taking time out today, and of course talk about the company and also the big challenge that customers, developers face today. So thanks for sharing those insights, and I would love to have you back on the show. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it. Have a great day.